There's a particular weapon. It crops up in various places and times in history, but seems to have been particularly popular in Spain between about 1400 and 1600. It has many names. I'm going to call it the mangual because it's quicker to say that than two-handed, very long, multi-headed, usually flail. You see, that's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? So I'm afraid I don't have one to show you, but I can describe it. Oh, here's a graphic of some sort. There you go. But in case that graphic was a bit rubbish, you've got a stick about that long, so it's quite long. And on the end of that, you've got sometimes cords, sometimes ropes, sometimes chains, and sometimes it's only one, but more often, certainly when they're pictured, we almost always see them pictured with three chains to just a small-ish head. Now, I was watching a video on the Todd's Workshop channel in which Todd, who is very good at making things, had made one of these and had given it to Matt Easton, who's quite good at swinging around medieval things, and they had a chat about it and made a few conjectural comments. And I'm not here to say that I think that they were wrong. They're both sensible chaps who know their stuff, but I'm just here to throw a few more ideas into the debate about how these things might have been used. So it's the handle's about that long, and the chains are, and this is quite critical, longer than the handle. Now, with a one-handed flail, some while ago I made 3 videos about one-handed flails, which I've just rewatched just in case there's something I said in them which might make me think, oh, I shouldn't have said that. I wouldn't say that now. And I think pretty much everything I said there was still decently sound, but I was talking about one-handed flails. Now, with a one-handed flail, the chain is never long enough for you to accidentally hit yourself in the hand. The chains on one-handed flails are short. But on these things, you can more than hit yourself in the hand. You can overlap the end and do yourself a major mischief almost anywhere. These chains are long, which means that you surely have to wield this in quite a different way. It's very definitely a two-handed weapon, so you don't have a shield. And they appear to have been used by lightly armoured people. This could be because they were poor. It's generally thought of as a poor man's weapon. We don't actually know that. I don't think we do. I've never come across any document saying that it was a poor man's weapon, but they would have been cheaper to make. And we don't have any evidence that they were used by knights and the like. And people trying them out and swinging them around find you have to put a lot of shoulder movement in. And so if you're wearing a lot of armour, it's actually very awkward. So they were probably used by poorer, less armoured fighters in the two-handed way. So you can't have a shield. How do you protect yourself? Because you can't really parry with these things. You can swirl them around and hope that your opponent's weapons are fended off that way. But a direct, targeted, deliberate parry, which you can then do something useful with and riposte, it's not really an option. So you have to swing them around. And you have to make sure that you don't hit yourself. Now, the mangual, I don't think it's a coincidence that they tend to be multi-headed and that they were around during the heyday of the halberd. I suspect that they were actually particularly good against things like halberds. So a halberd is a pole arm which has loads of sticky out bits at the end. It also has a rather nifty spike on the end. It's a spear with some extra cutlery sticking out sideways, but onto that extra cutlery sticking out sideways, the back spike, the axe head or whatever it is, you can wrap your chains, and 3 chains are far more likely to wrap than 1. And in the video on the Todd's Workshop channel, they tried it and immediately got a really good entanglement. And it struck me that 3 is a really good number for the entanglement, and much better than 1, because you don't just entangle with the opponent's weapon. Those chains also, once they've hit and start wrapping around and bouncing off things, they also get tangled up in each other, which enormously increases your chances of entangling in the first place, and just how firmly you entangle and how difficult it's going to be for your opponent to disentangle. I can't remember how I started that sentence now, but imagine some grammatical sensible way that I can finish that sentence. Now, we don't have a huge amount of evidence from the treatises about how they were used, but Mendoza in 1675, I think it was, said that they are used apart from thrusts, because you can't thrust with a flail, it doesn't really work. They're used pretty much like one of these. And in the video, they kept referring to these as montantes, which is a Spanish word for this. In a video that I made, link appearing somewhere, I called it a spadone, which is an Italian word for the same sort of thing. So what is this? Well, it's a very long longsword, if you like. It's so much longer than a standard longsword that it's a thing in its own right. And in my video, I concluded that they're very good for skirmishes. You could duel with them, but they're not ideal, and they're probably not much of a battlefield weapon. But in a skirmish, pretty handy. You have a few guys who are very intimidating and fast and know what they're doing with these, and they use it for crowd control. They whirl it about. People, whoa, I don't want to get anywhere near them, and they back off to where you want them to be so that others in your team can then finish them off with other weapons. So a crowd control, intimidating skirmisher's weapon, and that's quite likely that's what the manguals were used for, although there are other ideas which I'm going to put to you. This has a certain length to it and a certain reach, and that's going to affect the way you use it. The measure, the distance between you and your opponent. If you get your opponent within measure, that means at a distance which is suited to you for hitting them. The measure of one of these and of a mangual would be similar, and the way you would use your footwork and you would move around and for crowd control, for intimidating opponents, seems to be pretty similar. But that suggests that the mangual is a skirmish weapon, which doesn't quite fit the entanglement idea. So maybe it had two uses. Maybe you used it for crowd control, much like one of these in a skirmish, but in a battlefield, you used it quite differently for entanglement. They're quite long. They come up to at least your armpit, maybe your nose, something like that. That's the stick plus the chains, which means that there are certain strokes you can't do. So for instance, if you want to do an uppercut, well, you're rather out of luck, because if you want to do an uppercut, you'll probably find that the ground gets in the way. So if your weapon is on the ground, you will just drag those balls across the ground, bumping around and possibly moving unpredictably about the place, maybe hitting you in the ankle, and then you get a pathetic sort of upward flick from there. That's not going to do a lot. Now you could, of course, do an uppercut by holding your hands very, very high and swinging like this. But I don't think you would, because the danger to yourself would just be too good. Now you can swing it up here, whoom, like that, but then if you just carry on, they're going to come over and then they're going to hit me and kill me, and that's two of my favourite people. So that's no good. So I'm going to have to be very careful that when it comes down again, it misses me. Now, people will say, well, they would have practiced. These medieval people, they were ever so good at being medieval, and they would have practiced and they would have got really good. Well, a couple of problems with that. One is that how do you practice and get really good without going through the stage of not being really good and possibly going wrong just once and killing yourself? Now, you may have had training versions of it with softer ends, lighter ends and so forth that would have been non-fatal, but at some point you're going to have a go with the real thing, and the first day you have a go with the real thing, you're putting yourself in not insignificant danger if you're swinging it around up here. Now you could, of course, practice in the manner of a drum majorette on a drill field, and you could get really, really good at swinging it around like poi, and everyone looks at you and they go, whoa, wow. I remember years ago, I learned how to swing clubs, and I'll give you a quick demonstration now. Please bear in mind that I have not done this for many, many years, but it would be something along the lines of, there we go. Hey, 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 like that, and you can build up, quite a lot of speed. And I tried this with some maces. I had maces that were about this long, and I was really intimidating. And when I tried it, when I was larping about with some of my friends, it was clear that they did not know what to do, and I was whirling these around all over the shop, and I was facing very quickly, dancing around in between them, and they were just getting well out of my way. But I didn't actually hit anyone with that technique. I realized as I whirled them around, I'm either going to have to stop whirling them around and just go back to fighting normally, or I'm going to have to just run at someone. And if I just run at someone, I have no idea which of these maces is going to hit them or when, or what's going to happen next. I have really no control over what's going on, and you have to be dangerously close to your opponent. So I found it was not actually a useful combat technique. And here's my next point. You can get really good at whirling it around so that you don't hit yourself, but that technique does not survive contact with an actual enemy. When someone is fighting you, they do not move predictably. In fact, they are trying to be unpredictable, and they're going to put shields and other things in the way, deliberately trying to be awkward for you, because that's what they're like. And even if they fail to block and you hit them, then what happens to your three heads? They're not all going to hit on exactly the same point, and they may skid off and bounce, go off in all manner of directions that you cannot predict. So you may be terrific at fighting thin air and you never hit yourself, but as soon as you actually hit an enemy, then, oh, where is it going to go? So you're going to have to be really careful not to hit yourself. So the uppercut is probably out, frankly. Or what about over the top and down? Well, great. If I get you with the first hit and kill you, terrific, I win. But most fights are not over in one blow. And if I've really got to commit, because if I don't commit to that and I pull short, then it's going to be swinging back towards me. That's really, really bad. So I've got to really commit and bring it down. So if I miss, I'm just going to thump into the ground really hard, and then possibly you could stand on my chains, disabling my weapon, and you and your friends either side of you could just stab me. I would be horribly overextended and vulnerable, and so that move is pretty much out as well. So that leaves horizontal and diagonal swings, and this seems to be the way they were used. There are no thrusts, and there were just these lots and lots of whirling horizontal and diagonal swings, and you have to keep the momentum going. And one way you can use it, in the manner of the sword as well, is you turn your whole self around as you move about. You couldn't do that in the battlefield. In a battlefield, you've got blocks of people standing shoulder to shoulder in dense formations. That means you cannot use it that way in a battle. You might in a skirmish if you've got loads and loads of open terrain to work with, but on the battlefield, no, you don't have that opportunity really. If you start swinging it around sideways like this, all the people around you straight off this, you're straight off their Christmas card list. So probably not used in this way in battle, and it's very, very limited in what you can do, but you can entangle. Now, I don't think it's coincidence that the heyday of these two, of the halberd and this weapon, coincide. So imagine, what if this weapon overall, the mangual, is a bit rubbish? Apart from it's quite good as a counter to the halberd. Now, think of it, the environment of evolution of all these various weapons. All these weapons are tried out by lots of people over many generations, and they all fight against each other. And after a while, people conclude, the best overall weapon seems to be the halberd. And so after a while, people are going to, well, what's the best weapon? Well, it's okay, if it's the halberd, we'll go over the halberd. I remember in the early days of playing advanced Dungeons and Dragons, the geeks would pore over the great long lists of weapons available to adventurers, and they would look at the stats and try to work out which one is best, and they would do a bit of maths, and for a while everyone was using a bardiche, despite the fact that most people didn't even know what a bardiche was. By the way, this is a bardiche. Okay. Was that the greatest of all weapons? Well, for a while, according to the D&D stats, yeah, it was. So whatever's best, fine, we'll all use that then. So if overall the halberd is beating most things most of the time, people are going to gravitate towards using halberds. But then that creates an ecological niche for a weapon which, even though overall it's a bit rubbish, is good against halberds. So the environment of adaptation is made up of the population of rivals. So as halberds become more common, things that are good against halberds become more common, but they will never become the dominant weapon. They can't, because they're a bit rubbish. People familiar with Prisoner's Dilemma and evolutionary biology will know about game theory, where you have cheats and cooperators playing prisoner's dilemma. Some of you will know this. And so you get a population of cooperators, and they all interact with each other, and they all get 3 points every time they interact with someone, because I cooperate with you, you cooperate with me, we both do fine, we get 3 points, great. You introduce a couple of cheats into that population. Every time they meet a cooperator, they cheat him, and they get 4 points. But as they get more and more common, because more and more people will see these cheats and go, cheats seem to be prospering these days, I think I'll become a cheat. As the population of cheats grows, the proportion of the population that is using that strategy grows, more and more commonly cheats meet other cheats, and then they don't do so well because they each try to cheat each other, and they both just only get 2 points. So that's no good. So the cheats will never take over the entire population, because after a while it doesn't pay to be a cheat because there are too many cheats in the world. It only really pays to be a cheat in a world where most people are trying to cooperate. Well, it only pays to use a really rubbish weapon if it's good against the most common weapon. So if you're in a fight, he's probably going to be using a halberd, in which case this weapon is good. But if you come up against a guy who's got sword and shield, or most other weapons, actually you haven't picked a really good weapon. But it's good against halberds. So that's one way of explaining why they never became very common. They never became the main weapon, but they had their heyday at that particular time. Now, how were they used? Well, the treatises tell us that you have your hands fairly far apart, with your dominant hand closer to the chain and the head end, and you swing it about you, and you've got to keep the momentum going. Now, if you do stop, and of course sometimes you will have to stop, people have tried this out, have found that you cannot just stop suddenly, because if you just stop suddenly, the heads carry on, and then you're in trouble. So you've got to come to a halt slowly, which really limits the way you can use this weapon. With something like this, which is stiff, I can do an overhead blow, and then I can just bring it to a halt and then change direction, and it's no threat to me at all. But with something which has continued movement, like a flail, those options are not present. So you have to bring it slowly to a halt, which means that this is not a wieldy weapon. You are slowed by that. I did see one interesting technique where someone slid his hand along the handle onto the chain, and then down the chains, gathering them all together, and then widening his grip like this down the length, and getting control of the weapon, and then he can throw them back into the mix and then get it going again. Still an awful lot slower than just stopping and going the other way as you could with a sword. So it's not a wieldy weapon. It's a weapon you have to be quite careful with, not to hurt yourself. And a lot of the time you're turning your whole self, which means you're showing your back to the enemy. But if you've got the room to do that, then maybe you could do that safely, as long as he's not within measure of you at that critical moment. A chap called Björn Rutte, he did a load of experiments, and he came up with an interesting conclusion, which was that if you're reasonably good at it, and he was just practicing against static rubber tires and so forth, predictable static things, not actively parrying shield and sword wielding opponents, but he reckoned that you're reasonably safe enough, but he thought it just wasn't an effective enough weapon in comparison with other weapons. And so he thought that it was great for training. If you want to learn how to use a spadone or a montante, one of those big swords, then if you trained with something which forced you, for your own safety, to keep the momentum going, keep the flow, and build up your muscles as well, because it weighs a little bit more, then that would actually be a good way to improve your montante ability. And I think he's got a good point there. I can see that it could well have been used that way, but I suspect that it was used for other things too. And the entanglement thing is what I'm going to keep coming back to. So, in the video with Matt Easton, he suggested that you entangle your opponent's weapon and then draw something shorter. He said a cinquedilla, which what is a poor man doing with a bit of bling like an expensive cinquedilla? Okay, it doesn't matter. You draw something shorter and then you get in there and start hacking away. Well, yeah, you could, although the halberdier's probably got a rondel dagger or something that he can grab quickly as well. So you're not necessarily getting an advantage. When you entangle someone's halberd with your flail, yes, you've entangled his halberd, but at exactly the same time, he has entangled your flail. It sort of evens, only it's not. My money's on the halberdier, actually, because I can't thrust. If I thrust, immediately the chain goes slack, and then I lose my power over you. But if you, with your halberd, thrust quickly, and you can thrust a lot forwards more quickly than I can retreat, the chain will then go slack, which means that you've now got a bit of a guided movement, and you've got a big spike on the end of your weapon, which is long and stiff, and I've got a stick that's only this long, and it doesn't have a spike on the end, and I'm actually at a significant, I would say, disadvantage in a duel if I've entangled your halberd with my flail in a duel, which is quite significant, because in a battle, the situation is quite different. In a battle, if I'm in with a load of halberdiers, I've got a halberdier standing here and I've got a halberdier standing here, I can't do my big swingy, but I can do that, trying to get an entanglement, and then whoop, just let it drop and pull back, being kept safe by the halberdiers either side of me, and then I can have another go, and I can keep doing until I got it. I gotcha. Right, I've entangled. Now what I do is I pull for all I'm worth. I just pull. I'm not trying to get you. I'm pulling you forwards out of your formation. There you are. You're on the front foot, reaching with your halberd, and you're wearing loads of armor, making you a bit top heavy. And I've got this thing in both my hands, and I've got a lot of grip on it, and I'm going to pull for all I'm worth. I'm going to just turn it, and I pull you forwards out of your formation into the measure of the two halberdiers either side of me, who stab you and stab you and stab you. So in cooperation with neighbouring halberds, I can see that this could work quite well. Big problem, however, is that if that is the principal way that it's used in a battle, I would expect the design of the handle to be different. I would expect a big disc on the end of the stick so that my hand slides up against that, giving me superb grip, and I can then bring both my hands together and then throw my whole body back and just pull. All I'm doing is just pulling you forwards, because other people are going to finish you off. But I don't know of any evidence that they had a big disc on the end. Most of the time, it's just a stick. Now in Todd's reconstruction, he put studs on it for grip, but I would expect something really substantial on the end so that I am going to win this tugging match. So yeah, it's an idea, but it does have that not insignificant problem. Now, when he was trying it out, Matt said that there was an effect which he found awkward, which was that because all the chains were the same length, the three heads would clack against each other, and one would hit, and like a Newton's cradle, the one on the other end would fly off unpredictably, and the three chains wouldn't stay neatly together as he was swinging back. One of them would splay out, and the whole thing would become a little bit more awkward in his hands. And then Todd suggested, well, maybe you have the chains three slightly different lengths so that the three balls don't line up and don't clack against each other, and you've got a bigger area for hitting with. Interesting idea. I would say no. I think it will be more unwieldy actually for having three chains of different lengths. Better to have a single lump as much as you can get it swinging all together, and a single point of impact. If you are too close to your opponent and you hit him with the chain, that doesn't really matter, because the chain will wrap and you'll hit him somewhere else on the other side of his head. For instance, you were trying to hit him there, you got too close, it wrapped round and hit him on the other side of the head. Well, okay, I'll take that. Doesn't really matter. Also, I've never seen them pictured or described as having chains of different lengths, which is a problem, evidence. But I have another reason. If I'm dueling with you, skirmishing, if I'm using it with this sideways swing, action, so I'm not going for an entanglement, I'm just trying to hit you and kill you on my own because I don't have two halberdiers to help me out, then I really don't want my chains to be of different lengths, because you can see how much range I've got, and you're going to be very conscious of my measure. So when you see me stepping in, taking a swing, you're trying to be just out of measure so they just miss, and then you can, before I can recover, you can get in with your weapon, whatever it is, halberd, and stab me. So there's an awful lot of attacks aimed at just around the maximum range of the flail, which means that there's a very high chance that I just get you, in which case only the furthest, only the longest chain with only the head on the end of that hits you. So I've hit you with one and the other two carry on. That is not a safe place for me to be. I don't want to hit you with one of the three. I want to hit you with all or none. None, and I'm swinging through air and I can bring it under control because I've been practicing a lot. All, and they will all come to a halt and entangle and so forth. But just one or two, and then there's another one swinging off going goodness knows where. No, I really don't want that. So that is why I think they would all be the same length. I think it probably was used in battle, specifically against halberds and mixed in with other halberdiers, but you wouldn't be swinging it around much. There it's just an entanglement and a pulling weapon. I take Björn's idea that it could have been used as a training tool for other weapons, swords. Yes, it never took over. It wasn't ever that great. So if you're writing rules for Dungeons and Dragons or whatever, don't give it tremendous stats, because it was probably overall a bit rubbish, but in just the right environment, it could be pretty handy.